Welcome to No Rares Required, Episode 14, Dimir Poison Control. Every week I discuss a drafting strategy for a different archetype, and today we will be covering my strategy for drafting Dimir, or Blue-Black, in Phyrexia All Will Be One. Dimir has the lowest win rate on 17 lands, which I find very surprising because I think it is a good archetype, and I have been able to get a No Rares Required trophy using only uncommons and commons. Its low win rate might also be causing people to avoid the archetype, so let's dive in to how I think you can take advantage of it. The archetype's theme is proliferate control, and I think it's a pretty accurate description. In Dimir, I'm looking to get early poison counters on my opponent through 1 or 2 drop toxic creatures, then control my opponent as I raise the poison count each turn. Of all of the archetypes, this is the one that aims to get a toxic victory for sure. So let's dive in. My top common starts at tier 2. Similar to Boros, the commons are good, but not game-winning. Experimental Augury is Anticipate with Proliferate. It lets you dig through 3 cards for that card that you need to help control your opponent, and it also has the keyword Proliferate. So if your opponent has a poison counter by the time you play this card, then it gets you one step closer to victory. This card also wheels, since it's really only good in Izzet and Dimir, so plan on taking advantage of picking this up late. Gitaxian Raptor is my second tier 2 common. This one doesn't help you win through Toxic directly, but it helps slow your opponent down and does benefit off of Proliferate. It's good in any blue deck, so I expect this to be harder to find once people figure out that blue is actually playable. But for the time being, this card also wheels. A 1/4 flyer for 3, but what makes this card interesting is that you can manipulate its stat block by removing oil counters to become up to a 4/1 and trade up in value. I still plan on taking these pretty late since they are so undervalued, but it's cards like this that give you an advantage when drafting Dimir. My last tier 2 common for Dimir is Anoint with Affliction, and we finally see a card that is taken highly. These are usually gone by pick 3 or pick 4, so take them early when you can. This is probably the most powerful common in the set, and a mythic level common in Orsov. It exiles a creature that costs 3 or less for 2, and then if your opponent has 3 toxic counters and is corrupted, then it becomes exile target creature for just 2 mana. It's insane, and definitely the best removal at common. Take as many of these as you can get. Now for my tier 3 commons. These cards are still better than filler, but you may not want to just fill your deck with as many as you can get. Vivisurgeon's Insight is a great way to refuel your hand late in the game, and it comes with the handy keyword Proliferate. You do have to be careful with how much top end you put in your deck, but I aim to run 1 or 2 as my top end. This card also wheels, so plan on taking these late, since Dimir is the only archetype where they are good. My second tier 3 common is Malcator's Watcher. It's best in Azorius, where you can take advantage of the artifact synergy and try to make this into a 4/4 Vigilance Flyer with Unctus's Retrofitter. But in Dimir, it has one goal: slow your opponent down. Trade this and trade it early. I recommend having at least 6 1 or 2 cost creatures in every deck, because you can't afford to fall behind in this set, and Dimir is no exception. This card is neutral when it dies, and helps you find more of your control. Similar to all of the blue cards we've covered, this also tends to go pretty late, but if you notice Eye of Malcator's starting to disappear on the wheel, then you might need to compete for this card against whoever is in Azorius. My third tier 3 common is Mesmerizing Dose. Charmed Sleep in AFR didn't play very well, but the set has way less ways to take advantage of a perma-tapped creature, so it plays as decent removal. It also has the keyword Proliferate, so it helps you get one step closer to victory. These tend to get picked up a little sooner than the other blue cards that we've covered, so if you see one of these pick 7 or pick 8, then it's a pretty good sign that blue is open and it's time for some Dimir. My fourth tier 3 common is Whisper of the Dross. Being able to give an early creature -1/-1 can really help you not fall behind if you're on the draw, or it can help remove an early blocker for your cheap toxic creatures when you're on the play. Then if you draw this later in the game, it's a 1-cost proliferate that helps you get 1 poison counter closer to your toxic victory. This card also goes super late and can wheel, and I promise we'll eventually start to see some cards that you want to take early. For example, my 5th tier 3 common, Blightbelly Rat. You want this card and you need to take this one early. There are several archetypes that care about a 1 or 2 cost toxic creature, and this one comes with Dimir's favorite keyword, proliferate. Orsov, a much more popular archetype, will be looking to grab these as well, since the proliferate really puts it over the top. I've won many games by playing this card when my opponent was at 9 poison counters. Their only response is to exile it or use some sort of enchantment removal. It's definitely your best 2-drop, but you can manage without any copies, which is why I put it at tier 3. Pestilent Siphoner, the 1/1 flying toxic creature for 2, is a decent replacement, for example. My last tier 3 common is Stinging Hivemaster. I want to take a second and remark that's a total of 9 commons in Dimir. It's a relatively deep archetype, so not only is it underdrafted, but it can support more people than just one in a pod. Stinging Hivemaster is a 3/2 for 3, which isn't my favorite stat block, but it has Toxic and it creates a 1/1 Might when it dies, so it's sort of a 4/3 for 3, which is a much better stat block. You'll be competing for this card against other Orsov drafters, so I tend to try to pick these up by pick 5 or pick 6. Now for the uncommons, and Dimir has 2 mythic level uncommons. Can someone please remind me why this archetype is so bad? Drown in Ichor gives target creature -4/-4 until end of turn, and has our favorite keyword, proliferate. This removes most threats and is a great removal. This gets picked up early and makes a great pack 1 pick 1 since it's mythic level uncommon in Orsov, Golgari, and Dimir. The other mythic level uncommon in Dimir is Bioluous Skull Dweller. It performs very well, tier 1 or tier 2, in every other black archetype, but in Dimir it is so important. All of your proliferate spells don't do much if your opponent doesn't have at least 1 poison counter to get things started, and this is your only option for a turn 1 toxic creature. It also gets taken early and is a great pack 1 pick 1 since it's great in every black archetype. My one and only tier 1 uncommon for Dimir is the Signpost multicolored gold card Voidwing Hybrid. This card tends to get picked up a little late for uncommons, around pick 4 or pick 5, and I find it surprising that they're getting picked up at all, considering that Dimir is so underdrafted. It's a 2/1 flyer with Toxic for 2 that returns from your graveyard to your hand every time you proliferate. This is a great recurring threat, and you want as many as you can get. My one and only tier 1 uncommon for Dimir, tier 2 uncommon for Dimir is Ambulatory Edifice. There's nothing special about this card in Dimir. It performs about the same in every black archetype. A 3/2 for 3 is a terrible stat block, but there are 25 creatures with 1 HP, not to mention the 1/1 mites, that this can kill when it enters the battlefield. You can also play this after you attack to ping a blocker that's left at 1 HP. These tend to get picked up pretty early, so I aim to pick this up around turn 4 or turn 5. Now for the tier 3 uncommons. Distorted Curiosity is divination but costs 1 to draw 2 cards if your opponent is corrupted. It goes late, especially for an uncommon. You can pick these up, pick 5, pick 6, sometimes even pick 7. Distorted Curiosity is also only really good in Dimir, since you have to really slow your opponent down to the point where you can take some time off of developing the board to draw the 2 cards. But since it doesn't impact the board state, I really only recommend running 1 or 2 in my Dimir deck. My second tier 3 uncommon for Dimir is Serum Snare. I had high hopes for this card in tempo-based strategies, but because the curves are so low in the set, it hasn't been great for a value gaining card as much as it has been good as a survival tool. The proliferate keyword is what makes this playable in Dimir, and it works nicely against Boros opponents, especially where you can bounce their 2/2 Formyridin token. There are a fair amount of cards that have decent enter the battlefield effects, so I'd recommend only running 1 or 2. My last Tier 3 uncommon is Atraxa's Skitterfang. It's a Tier 2 or Tier 3 uncommon in every archetype, so it makes a decent pack 1 pick 1, especially since it's colorless, so it keeps you open. It's best in Gruul and Simic because of the oil synergies, or in Azorius for the artifact synergies. In Dimir, it helps you get through a toxic creature and is still a great card to include, but because of how early these tend to get picked up, I find myself usually choosing a different card over this one. Now for the rares. My Tier S superstar is Archfiend of the Dross. It is a boss in a deck that aims to proliferate every turn. It performs best in Rakdos, where you're aiming to win through damage instead of slowly poisoning your opponent, but its second best archetype is Dimir, and is a great pack 1 pick 1. My first Tier 1 rare is Blue Sun's Twilight. It's best in Simic, where you aim to ramp to 7 mana, but it's great in any blue archetype, and I really like it in Dimir because you are aiming for a strategy that goes a bit later than some of the other archetypes. My second Tier 1 rare is Kaido, Dancing Shadow. This card goes in a lot of decks outside of just Dimir, and might be the most splashed card in the set. It's really fun to combo this with cards that have interesting enter the battlefield effects, and it works best in Izzet and Simic and Dimir, where you can reliably proliferate and get up to 3 loyalty a turn. My Tier 2 rare for Dimir is Venser, Corpse Puppet. It really is a card only for the Dimir archetype. It's a 1/3 lifelink toxic 1, so it can be used to get that early poison counter, but its real value comes from spawning a 3/3 artifact every time that you proliferate. You can also give an artifact you control flying and lifelink when you proliferate with a card like Experimental Augury at instant speed, so you can use it to create a surprise blocker as well. My first Tier 3 rare for Dimir is Unctus Grand Metatech. Looting every time you tap a blue creature can be really nice to help you dig for your removal and ditch extra lands late in the game. It's best in Azorius, where you can benefit the most off of the artifact synergies, but it's definitely good enough in Dimir to make the cut. My last Tier 3 rare is Black Sun's Twilight. It's better in Golgari or Rakdos, where you can bring back a heavy hitter, since Dimir doesn't tend to play large creatures, but the -X/-X is good removal, and you don't need to play it for 7 for it to be decent removal. And now for the mythics. My Tier S superstar mythic is Sheoldred the Apocalypse. She's Tier S in every black archetype, and an easy pack 1 pick 1. A 4/5 Death Touch for 4 that gains you 2 life every time you draw a card, and zaps them for 2 every time they draw a card is a no-brainer. I have noticed that the upkeep stop before the draw step seems to be a bit buggy. It'll stop the first time, but afterward I've been having to add one when I'm playing against this card, so just a heads up until they get it fixed. My Tier 1 mythic is Jace, the Perfected Mind. There's also nothing special about Jace in Dimir. He performs well in every blue archetype, but does benefit from Proliferate, since if you can ultimate at 7, that's over half their deck being milled. My next Tier 2 mythic for Dimir is Vraska, Betrayal's Sting. She's best in Golgari, since you already have card draw and Proliferate pretty readily in Dimir. But being able to have a proliferate trigger every single turn, and then her ultimate can get you up to 9 poison, and since you are trying to win through a poison victory, it can work in a pinch. There just tends to be better cards that are kind of already doing this in the Dimir strategy. And last but not least, we have Tekuthal, Inquiry Dominus. A 3/5 flyer for 4 is a great stat block, and making it so each of your proliferates trigger twice is a great way to get to those 10 poison counters. So, thank you for enjoying my simple guide to Dimir. I posted a full draft with Dimir earlier this month that had only commons and uncommons if you want to see how I use this guide to grab trophies. I'll post the link in the top right corner. Also, if you wouldn't mind, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. It really helps me out. If there's an archetype that you want to see next, let me know in the comments below. Once again, thank you all for the support, and I'll see you next week.